The cameras were rolling on a Monday afternoon when Coach Gary Rennick, former collegiate football coach, 68 years old, the kind of man who introduced himself using the word coach as a title rather than a descriptor, finished his pre-game warm-up interview with Steve Harvey and said, with the confidence of someone who has never been surprised by a room, "I'll be honest with you, Steve. I watched this show with my grandkids. I didn't think it was going to be my kind of thing. You know, a show like this." He waved his hand vaguely at the studio, at the audience, at Steve Harvey himself. Steve Harvey looked at him. He knew exactly what the wave meant. He had seen that wave 10,000 times in 60 years. The wave that dismissed without specifying, that belittled without committing to a word, that communicated your world versus my world in a gesture so casual it could be argued away. Steve had spent his career being waved at. He let Gary Rennick finish the wave. He looked at him for 4 seconds. He said 5 words. 5 words. Completely calm, completely final, with the settled authority of a man who has never needed another person's permission to occupy a space. "This show is my class." The studio erupted before Steve finished the sentence. It was a Monday in November 2022, and Gary Rennick had come to Atlanta from Knoxville, Tennessee, with his wife Carol, his son Danny, his daughter-in-law Patrice, who was black and who had, during the car ride, tried twice to gently suggest to Gary that he be a little thoughtful in how he spoke on national television, and who would later describe this experience as like trying to redirect a freight train with a sticky note. And their grandson Tyler, who was 16 and had been excited about the show for months. Gary was the kind of man who had been the loudest voice in every room he'd entered for 40 years, and had come to believe that this was evidence of something rather than simply a habit. He had coached college football for 22 years. He had won 2 conference championships. He had opinions about everything and expressed all of them with the certainty of a man who had never been challenged in a way that stayed with him. He was not, by most measures, a villain. He was a man who had lived entirely inside a particular set of permissions and had never been asked to notice them. His daughter-in-law Patrice had been asked to notice them every day of her life. His son Danny navigated the space between them with the exhausted diplomacy of a good man in an imperfect situation. Tyler, their grandson, Danny and Patrice's son, had grown up bilingual in the 2 cultures of his family and had his mother's eyes and his grandfather's laugh, and had learned to love both of them without pretending the distance between them didn't exist. The green room had gone fine. Gary had been charming in the way that men like him are often charming. Big energy, good stories, easy with strangers. He'd made people laugh. He'd been warm with the production staff. He'd been himself, which was the thing that was both his appeal and his problem. When Steve came out and worked the room, he'd gotten to Gary and asked the standard questions. Gary had answered well. He was entertaining. And then he had made the wave. The wave was not loud. The wave was not a slur. The wave was the quiet, gestural version of something that people who have been on the receiving end of it their entire lives recognize immediately and completely. The dismissal that doesn't have to commit to words because it doesn't expect to be called on it. Steve Harvey had spent 60 years being waved at by men like Gary Rennick. In boardrooms and network offices and backstage at shows where the producer looked slightly surprised that he'd gotten there. The wave said, "Your world is entertaining, but it isn't mine." The wave said, "I'll allow it." The wave said, fundamentally, "I'm the standard." Steve Harvey looked at Gary Rennick for 4 seconds. "This show is my class," he said. The studio erupted immediately before Steve finished the syllable, not gradually. Immediately, the kind of eruption that happens when a room has been holding something and suddenly has permission to release it. 300 people standing, some of them within about 3 seconds. Gary Rennick blinked. The wave was still technically in the air. He lowered his hand. Steve Harvey did not change his expression. He did not raise his voice. He simply looked at Gary Rennick with the complete composure of a man who has arrived. This studio, Steve continued, and the room was going quieter now because people wanted to hear every word, was built by people who come here from every corner of this country, from every background, every income level, every kind of family. And they play a game and they laugh and sometimes they cry and they win something or they don't. And they go home with something they didn't have when they walked in. He paused. That's the kind of class I run. It's been running for 46 years. And I wouldn't trade it for any other room I've ever been in. He looked at Gary steadily. Now, I think you might have meant something different from what you said. And I'm going to give you the chance to say what you meant. The studio was quiet. The particular quiet of a room that is watching a man be offered a door and wondering whether he will walk through it. Gary Rennick looked at Steve Harvey. He looked at Patrice. He looked at Tyler. He had the expression of a man who has just seen himself from the outside, not as the coach, not as the loudest voice, but as the man his daughter-in-law had been trying to redirect in the car for 4 hours, and as the man his grandson was watching right now from the family lineup. I said the wrong thing, Gary said. I said it wrong. What I meant, I watched this show with my grandkids, and I wasn't expecting to enjoy it the way I do. I wasn't expecting. He stopped. He started again. I wasn't expecting you, he said, looking at Steve. I wasn't expecting to respect what you do the way I do, and I said it in a way that came out wrong. I apologize. Steve looked at him. I'll take that, Steve said, because I believe you mean it. He paused. But I want to say one more thing. Not to you, to everyone in this room. Because this moment is one I want people to take home with them. He turned to the camera. There are rooms in this country that people like me are allowed into, and rooms that people like me are allowed into, but not considered part of. And the difference between those two is subtle enough that the person doing it usually doesn't know they're doing it. He looked at the room. What I want is for everyone watching to ask themselves, when you enter someone else's space, is there a wave? And do you know you're making it? The studio was completely still. Then Tyler, Gary's 16-year-old grandson, Danny and Patrice's son, walked to the center podium. He hadn't been invited. Steve saw him coming and stepped back. Can I say something? Tyler said. Go ahead, Steve said. Tyler looked at his grandfather. Grandpa, I love you, and you do that wave a lot. You don't notice it. But I notice it. And Mom notices it. He paused. I wanted you to know that I notice it. Gary Rennick looked at his grandson. He was quiet for a long time. Something moved in his face. Something real. The specific shift of a man hearing something true from someone whose opinion matters more to him than he knew. Tyler, he said, thank you for saying that to me. Steve Harvey stepped back in. He put his hand on Tyler's shoulder. This young man right here, he said to the room, this is what change looks like. Right here in this family. Today, he called his cultural competency and community dialogue partner live on stage and committed to bringing the Rennick family into a facilitated family dialogue session, funded by the foundation, designed specifically for families navigating cultural and racial dynamics across generations. He said it on air. He said it as a gift, not a punishment. He made that distinction clearly. I'm not doing this because Gary is a bad person. I'm doing it because good people deserve good tools. He announced both families were receiving the full prize packages. The opposing family from the other side of the stage, the Patel family from Atlanta, applauded, and their captain, a man named Raj, crossed the stage and shook Gary's hand and said, "Sir, it takes a lot to hear something like that and stay in the room. I respect it." Patrice, who had been standing at the end of the family lineup through the entire exchange, looked at her father-in-law. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. Gary Rennick walked to her. He stood in front of her. He said, "Patrice, I'm going to do better." She nodded once. That was enough for today. Tomorrow was another day, and they would get there. Danny looked like a man who had been holding a stone for a very long time and had just been told he could set it down. When the episode aired 7 weeks later, the clip of Steve's 5 words, "This show is my class," was viewed 295 million times in 11 days. The hashtag #MyClass trended globally. Business schools used it as a case study in code switching and microaggression. The clip was cited by diversity trainers, coaches, teachers, and parents across the country. 3 major sports organizations requested permission to use it in their internal equity training programs. 3 months after that Monday, Gary Rennick attended his first facilitated dialogue session with Danny, Patrice, and Tyler. He described it in a later post-show interview as the most uncomfortable and most important 3 hours of my life. He attended 4 more sessions. He bought a book that Tyler recommended. He started asking Patrice questions he had never asked before. A year after the taping, Tyler wrote his college application essay about the wave, about watching his grandfather make it, about the moment in Atlanta when his grandfather heard that he noticed, about what it meant to love someone and still name the thing they do. He was accepted to his first choice school. The Gary and Tyler Rennick Family Dialogue Fund was established in both their names. Gary insisted on Tyler's name being first to support intergenerational, cross-cultural family dialogue programs across the Southeast. Its motto, "Good people deserve good tools." In its first year, the fund facilitated dialogue sessions for over 200 families. Steve Harvey, in a later interview, said, 5 words. That's all it took. Because the 5 words were true. This show is my class. I built it. I host it. I run it. It's mine, and I have never, not for 1 second, needed permission to be in a room I built myself. He paused. Gary Rennick is a good man who had a blind spot, and his grandson loved him enough to name it. That's the whole story. That's how families get better. Some waves are made without thinking. Some waves are called out by the people who love you most, in rooms you didn't expect, in front of everyone. And some waves, when a man finally lowers his hand, become the first step toward something better. This show is my class. It always has been. And it always will be. If this moment, and the 5 words that set the room on fire, moved you, make sure to subscribe and hit that thumbs up button. Share this with someone who needs to be reminded that the rooms we build belong to us, fully, completely, without permission. Have you ever had to introduce yourself to someone who had already decided who you were? Share your story in the comments. And ring that notification bell, because as Steve Harvey proved, you don't need a big speech. Sometimes 5 words is exactly enough.